So, welcome back. We're still talking about surgical nutrition and metabolism. This is the first pit stop towards your way to become a great surgeon. So, in this section, we'll be talking about overfeeding and malnutrition. Overfeeding and malnutrition are two extremes of the seesaw of nutrition. We have overfeeding on one hand, where you feed too much, and we have malnutrition on the other hand, where you feed too little. So we'll see what is the difference between overfeeding and starvation, despite the obvious. Then we'll be comparing starvation with inflammation, and we'll see what are the changes that occur during starvation, what are the changes that occur during inflammation. Then we'll be comparing them. And then we'll talk about the metabolic response to stress, general stress. So we'll see if a stressor comes to the body, how does the body respond metabolically. I hope you're excited about this section. Let's get into it and keep you excited. So first of all, overfeeding, when you're giving too much calories to a patient, it may lead to increased carbon dioxide production. Now, why is that? Carbon dioxide was the byproduct of the fuels that were used to power the body. So when you're giving too much of these fuels, there would be too much of carbon dioxide. Then there can be hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia, again, because you're giving too much food. Since there's too much food, there would be slightly towards a greater side. There would be slight increase in the glucose in the blood. However, glucose is tightly regulated within the body with the help of insulin and glucagon. So there would not be a very substantial rise, but there would be slightly increased glucose in the bloodstream. This increased glucose may give rise to sepsis, or it may invite infection because it serves as a substrate for the bacteria to grow. Now, it would lead to lipogenesis, so new lipids would be formed. It can cause hepatic steatosis because the fat cells which are being deposited in the liver, and as a result of which hepatic steatosis takes place. There can be mineral or vitamin poisoning because you're simply giving too much. Since you're giving too much, these minerals and vitamins would be deposited in the body. Only the fat-soluble vitamins, of course, the water-soluble vitamins are not deposited in the body. So these deposits may turn to poisons because in a normal amount, these are the nutritional elements of the body. But when the normal amount is exceeded, these become the poisons. Then we can have severe electrolyte imbalances. Now, why is that? So, osmotically active agents like sugars in hyperglycemia, the carbohydrates in hyperglycemia, they tend to circulate into the blood. When they're circulating in the blood, they imbibe water along with them. They do not allow the water to leave the body, as a result of which the electrolytes, they cause other electrolytes to merge, and hence the water that has to be secreted through the body is not secreted properly, and there is edema and electrolyte imbalance. Then we can have hypophosphatemia as well. Hypophosphatemia is the part of the electrolyte balance. So calorimetry may be indicated to accurately estimate the energy expenditure during various stages of the disease. However, we've talked about this calorimetry. It's slightly complicated. You have to measure the oxygen that is going in. You have to measure the carbon dioxide that is being secreted. So it's a very complicated procedure. Now, what happens in starvation? So first of all, starvation, so more than 8 hours have passed since you've eaten. So now the production of insulin, it decreases. As a result of the decreased production of insulin, the glucose in the body that was in the liver, that is being utilized. When the glucose is being utilized, this glucose, the stores of this glucose in the body, they decrease. When the stores of these glucose are decreasing, the proteins come into action. Now these proteins are broken down into amino acids. These amino acids are broken down to produce glucose again. This glucose now provides energy to the brain, because brain only uses glucose for its energy. Now at the same time, this glucose also goes to the red blood cells, because they are also dependent on this glucose. Now, since the body has to conserve energy, this red blood cell produces lactate. The lactate enters the lactate now contributes to the production of glucose. Now, at the same time, the byproduct of protein metabolism, urea, is being secreted by the kidney in the urine. Now, at the same time, there is breakdown of triglycerides to produce fatty acids. These fatty acids, they also help in the production, these free fatty acids also help in the production of glucose, that is the gluconeogenesis, and they provide energy as well. So this is how in starvation the body adapts itself. That is, when the stores of the glucose are dwindling, the proteins come into play, the fats come into play. The proteins are broken down into amino acids. These amino acids are being utilized to produce energy. Now the fat tissues, the triglycerides, are broken down to fatty acids. The fatty acids again are converted to glucose. So with the help of the fats and glucose, with the help of the proteins and the fats, the glucose is produced in the body, and the body tends to maintain a steady glucose supply to the brain as well as the red blood cells. Now let's compare starvation with inflammation. So first of all, we have the basal metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate in simple starvation, it remains the same or it slightly decreases. However, in stress or inflammation, the basal metabolic rate increases. So the presence of mediators in simple starvation, there are no mediators. However, in stress or inflammation, there are a great variety of mediators. So the major fuel oxidized in simple starvation is the fat. So fat is the major fuel oxidized because the proteins are limited in number, and fats usually are in a greater amount and easily available. In stress or inflammation, there is no discrimination. Whatever is there is being used for energy. Now, ketone body production in simple starvation, it's very high. So there are a lot of ketones that are being produced. However, in stress or inflammation, the amount of ketone produced, there may be some ketones produced or there may not be. Hepatic ureagenesis is the liver tends to produce urea in simple starvation. However, there is a large amount of urea that is produced in stress or inflammation. Now, there's negative nitrogen balance in simple starvation, and the negativity of the nitrogen balance increases in stress or inflammation because the proteins are being broken down. Now, in terms of gluconeogenesis, so there's some gluconeogenesis taking place in simple starvation, but in stress or inflammation, because the body is in panic state, so there's lots of gluconeogenesis. When we compare the muscle proteolysis, in simple starvation, some muscles may be broken down because it's simple starvation at this point in time, but in stress or inflammation, there's no discrimination, as I've said before, so whatever is present is being broken down. So in hepatic protein synthesis, there's somewhat the protein synthesis is there. However, in stress or inflammation, a great variety of proteins are being formed in the liver. Now, let's talk about the responses to stress. So we have a neurohumoral response. So there are two phases of this neurohumoral response. First of all, we have a shock phase. This is a short-lived phase, the shock phase or the ebb phase. It lasts about 12 to 24 hours, which immediately follow the injury. Now, the cardiac output, the body temperature, the oxygen consumption, and the overall metabolism are reduced. So, energy is being conserved in the ebb phase. Now, the blood loss and anaerobic metabolism and lactic acid synthesis, this is occurring. So, the neurohumoral response has a ebb phase or a shock phase, which lasts about 12 to 24 hours after an injury. Now, the cardiac output, the body temperature, the oxygen consumption, and the overall body metabolism has reduced. There may be blood loss and anaerobic metabolism. There may be lactic acid synthesis. Now, following the ebb phase or the shock phase is the flow phase. This is also known as the delayed phase. In this delayed phase, the basal metabolism, initially it comes back to normal and then it increases. Now, the degree of hypermetabolism is related to the severity of the original insult. So, initially the body was trying to conserve itself, but now since the body has somewhat regained its footing, now it increases its metabolism, and the degree of increase is directly proportional to the amount of trauma. Now, the more it is more intense as compared to the shock phase and extends over the longer periods of time. So, this is the neurohumoral response, that is the response that the body gives to a stressor or an injury. There is a short-lived shock or ebb phase. Then there's a long-lived flow phase. The short-lived or ebb phase is for 12 to 24 hours, and the flow phase is for the rest of the time. Now, talking about this neuroendocrine and cytokine mediated response. So let's take a look at what happens and how. So first of all, an injury has occurred. The signal has traveled to the brain. From brain, it gives the signals to the pituitary gland. So from hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, now the pituitary gland is acting on the pituitary gland, increases in the production of ACTH and GH. Now, ACTH and GH cause increase in adipocyte lipolysis. At the same time, they act, since ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone, it acts on the adrenal gland. These adrenal glands, now they increase the production of adrenaline and cortisol. Since the production of adrenaline and cortisol is increased, the hepatic gluconeogenesis, it increases. At the same time, there's stimulation of the pancreas. The stimulation of the pancreas causes increase in glucagon, as a result of which the skeletal muscle protein degradation also increases and the hepatic acute phase protein synthesis increases. Along with that, there's increase in the production of interleukin-1, tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-6, and interleukin-8. All of these are responsible for pyrexia, that is increase in the temperature. And finally, there's decrease in the insulin, decrease in level of insulin like growth factor 1, testosterone, and T3. This is responsible for hypermetabolism. So this flow chart describes how neuroendocrine and cytokine mediated response comes into play, and what are the factors that act at various steps in the body so that the body can act in unison and mount a collective response to an insult. So this was all about this section. We talked about various metabolisms in this section and the way the body deals with the insults when they're given to the body. I hope you understood it. For further sections, keep watching sqadia.com.